Okay, hello everyone, and welcome to the stream. Today we're going to be commentating on a match from the 2021 USTA TAC Open between NohatCoder and ManaT. It looks like they are about ready to go. I'll let them know that we are all set. And they should be ready to start now. ManaT and NohatCoder are two of the sort of established players in the community. NohatCoder has been top of the rankings for quite some time. I think, in my opinion, probably the best player out there, and has been for a long time. He's also created one of the sort of most influential strategy guides, which is impressive considering that it's only it's about a page long. So definitely check that out if you haven't already. And you'll see from the rankings here that NohatCoder is above a 2100 rating. ManaT's no slouch either, at an 1823. So this should be a very good match. And we're seeing a pretty standard opening with adjacent corners followed by this sort of mirrored center opening, and then NohatCoder has gone with the defense from black, which I'm partial to as well, which is dropping the capstone here on e3. So once that capstone's down, obviously that's looking to cut off this vertical threat. So ManaT, who's playing as white, has started to think, okay, well, I need to develop a horizontal threat instead. But by placing here at a2 now, Nohat has kind of regained or seized the momentum and is looking to be the first one to make attack threat, which he hasn't done quite yet. But that slightly preemptive capstone move is not hugely surprising, to be honest, because that was going to be happening at some point anyway. And what it means now is that if he wants to, can bring the capstone down onto d2 as well and cut off any threat that comes, for example, by ManaT placing on e1 and e2. So b1 from NohatCoder. Both players are playing pretty fast here. You can see there with the 15-second increment, they're both above the initial starting 15 minutes on the clock. So they're both playing well within that 15-second increment, which will serve them well when it comes down to the end game, and you're having to make decisions on a complex board with potentially a lot of counting and difficult decisions to be made. So you want to have time on the clock towards the end there. So you can see a couple of moves back here. ManaT makes the first threat across the bottom here, and rather than capturing down with the capstone, which is what I would have expected really from NohatCoder, he decides to bring a2 across, make his own threat. ManaT immediately captures back with the flat stone, and in response, NohatCoder is just filled in on c2, and I think that seems initially slightly counterintuitive. You would usually expect, for example, maybe a wall to come down on a2 or c2, but I think what NohatCoder is thinking here is, because ManaT hasn't placed his capstone yet, NohatCoder doesn't want to be in a position where he's placing a wall, for example, on a2, and then ManaT can immediately place his capstone to then protect this stack and sort of nullify that wall's potential to capture here. And now, instead, with ManaT making this capture onto c2, NohatCoder can bring his capstone down, and there's now an extra black flatstone under this stack, making it even more juicy and more appealing to capture. So it'll be interesting to see how ManaT responds here. He could... Okay, interesting. I was going to say he could run away with this stack up onto c3. Now that would be in a position where Nohat could just capture again, but it would at least not leave all of these black flats underneath a strong black capstone. But by placing the capstone here, it's in a nice central position, and ManaT's able to make a fairly strong threat here, which Nohat covers up immediately. That's not a threat from NohatCoder, and it does leave his capstone somewhat isolated on the edge here, and it with a bunch of white flatstones underneath it. So that's going to limit the mobility of this capstone if it does come back into play at some point. So that was an interesting exchange from these two players here. I think, if anything, it probably leaves white in the slightly better position. You can see now that black is the only one of these players with any liabilities, that is with one of their flatstones on top of an opposing flatstone. So this white flat here is going to potentially be able to be freed by either a wall or by the capstone. This d1 play from ManaT, I think I would have preferred to play c2, and you can see that NohatCoder immediately covers up c2 because that both gives him a attack threat along the bottom here, and it prevents ManaT from making an attack threat with c2 himself, whereas if ManaT, instead of playing d1, had played c2 instead, he could then have either played onto c1 next or onto d1 next. d1 would have been an attack threat, c1 would not, but would give a stronger, I think, position there, rather than this, which is forcing the reaction from ManaT, although that capstone capture is a pretty strong response to this and now creates his own attack threat. So I guess that ManaT was sort of anticipating that c2 play and wanted to make it so that NohatCoder was going to have to respond to this d3 minus capture. So the wall comes down. That is a pretty strong response, particularly when there's a black piece under the white capstone, so ManaT wasn't able to immediately come back up and crush. But now, as I mentioned, this white piece is going to be able to be utilized by ManaT, capturing over onto e2. So Nohat continues to sort of try and push some kind of tempo and momentum, playing onto c6. I expect this stack will probably, come across onto there. Now, NohatCoder can immediately renew the threat here by placing onto a2. It'll be interesting to see whether ManaT decides to respond by, for example, playing a3 minus, creating another threat of his own. It's been an interesting pattern here where it's a lot of attack threats being made and then responded to with attack threats from the other player. Instead, ManaT decides to capture up, and you can see now both capstones have 4 enemy pieces underneath them, so that is going to be an interesting dynamic when we move towards the end game. It's going to make walls much more influential in the flat count than they otherwise otherwise might have been. Worth noting that this capture up was a attack threat again, by this capstone coming down onto d3. NohatCoder, obviously, when you're one of the top players, that's not something that he was going to miss. So captures down with the wall, and now ManaT is setting up with c2 to kind of re-establish this north-south connection. So NohatCoder could play b4 to make another attack threat if he wants to, and does so. That makes sense. And again, because there's nowhere that ManaT can place a piece to stop this threat, he's going to have to decide to either capture again with his capstone, so for example coming over onto b3, which would cut off and prevent NohatCoder from making another threat, or he's going to have to capture with a one of his flat stones, which would introduce a little bit of a liability into his position. But if he, I was going to say if he did capture with the capstone, that would put 6 pieces in that stack, and on a 6x6 board, that is the carry limit, which would mean that stack could only move once more without being completely, well, not stuck, but any movement beyond that would need to leave black pieces behind. So instead decides to keep the capstone central and with a little bit more mobility, capture up onto b3. And that is also potentially going to give ManaT the opportunity to make more of a horizontal threat either along 3 and 4 or down here towards the bottom of the board. So NohatCoder's response, for the first time in a little while, there isn't an immediate attack threat. So he could, for example, place a wall on b2, look to capture this stack, release that captive. And again, like I said, because of all these black pieces under the white capstone, that wall isn't in danger of being crushed, because if it was, at least in this current position, NohatCoder would just be able to spread that stack down for the win. But rather than immediately threaten this piece here, NohatCoder is instead choosing to cut off the option for ManaT to make another attack threat immediately by placing on c1. That feels a little bit passive to me, and particularly because it's down here on the edge, it allows ManaT to do what he's doing here, which is establish more control in the center while also pushing towards making does make another threat straight away with d1 capturing across onto c1, and it also pushes towards this horizontal route. So it's looking pretty good for ManaT here, to be honest. He's played very well in this opening stage. It's by no means over yet, and NohatCoder has definitely got the chops to recover from this position, but I think it's fair to say that white is ahead, at least in terms of momentum. The flat count, 5, 8, so 8 each. So NohatCoder, when you factor in the 2 Komi, which we're playing with in this tournament, which basically adds to black's flat count should the game go to flats, NohatCoder is still ahead on the flat count, but white is definitely in the stronger position to be creating threats and forcing the opponent to respond. and that is going to potentially allow him to turn those moves into positive flat count in the end. So ManaT with E3 made a fairly straightforward horizontal threat here. NohatCoder responds with A2 plus, cutting it off on this side, and ManaT decides, okay, well, if you're gonna do that there, I am going to work on pressuring you in another direction, and looks to place on E2 and threaten this E1 road just here. Pluto the Brave in the chat saying, looking quite nice for ManaT right now. Yeah, I agree. I was just saying the same thing. So NohatCoder now responds capturing onto D6 from C6. And yeah, interestingly, in both those responses, A2 plus and C6, sort of cutting off the anchor point to the edge, which quite often is the way that is going to make it most difficult for the opponent to immediately renew that attack threat, and which is going to give you a little bit of breathing room to do something like this, place a wall, and start making a more kind of permanent response to the opponent's threats. But you can see now, just with that couple of moves, what I was saying about the flat count, NohatCoder has been forced to place a wall, which is reducing is not advancing his flat count, and also he's created a couple of liabilities which are going to potentially come back to bite him later in the game. And ManaT is content to just place more flats, continue not making immediate threats, but just developing his presence on the board. And the other thing that's notable about these two captures from NohatCoder is they have somewhat diluted his potential for making road threats by disconnecting a little bit from this north-south route that he's had going on through most of the game. But as you can see now, with ManaT not making those immediate threats, he's looking to just try and regain some of that momentum, placing on A4 to start on this north-south axis again. ManaT rather places A2. Again, just placing a flat stone. I would have been tempted myself to place a wall on A2 here, just to be a more powerful option for capturing onto A3. But I think it's definitely understandable that ManaT is thinking, okay, I'm not in a position where I'm actually worried about this threat turning into something really dangerous. However, it is worth noting that this capstone could throw itself all the way over onto A2. So, for example, if NohatCoder here decides to capture onto C6, that doesn't look like an immediate attack threat, but it is a very sneaky one with the throw all the way across here. So ManaT may need to keep an eye out for that, and I'm sure that NohatCoder has noticed it and is potentially in this position. I think that he is feeling in a bad enough spot that he's going to try and make the sneaky threat and see if he can get away with a win here from a position that otherwise is looking pretty precarious for him. So let's see if ManaT notices that. And if so, what is his response? A2 plus would both get that space out of the immediate danger from the black cap, and it would create a threat along 3 file and potentially allow ManaT to unlock that captive on A3. However, the capture with the flat stone is much less, that's in danger of then being recaptured from A4, or potentially NohatCoder could chuck a wall down on A2, which is, I would not be surprised to see that be the response now that ManaT does go for that A2 plus capture. But well done on ManaT for not falling into that trap of the cap throw. See, NohatCoder can't immediately place the wall on A2 because of the tack threat, so instead goes for the capture with the flat stone. So now ManaT could respond again with the wall if he wants to, or could capture over from B3, or it could instead do something like placing just on D6 and renew that north-south tack threat. Okay, instead goes for the wall, not the wall, the capture with the flat. That stack is now looking like a prime candidate for NohatCoder to chuck a wall down next to. Again, what with there not being an immediate tack threat, I think if NohatCoder does place a wall, yeah, okay, as expected. Now ManaT can take that whole stack and throw it up if he wants to, or could just bring it onto B3 for the threat. If it were me, I think I would be looking to just throw everything up, get away from this wall. It is still then going to be in a slightly vulnerable position for NohatCoder placing a wall on, for example, B6 or B5. But okay, no, instead just leaves it there for now, makes the threat, forces NohatCoder to respond to this, and actually, no, it's not. It was close to it anyway, with a threat both horizontally and vertically, but there was at least one. There were these two pieces, which both form part of each different road, and that's something to look out for when you're facing a horizontal threat or making a dual threat, rather. Which are the pieces that are shared by both potential roads? And here it's these three. So NohatCoder responds by taking one of those out, and now ManaT does bring this stack over onto B3. Again, renews the threat. That is only a threat in one direction this time, so NohatCoder can, for example, bring the wall up onto A3. This stack can potentially come down onto B1, which would create a threat up top here. But yeah, it is looking like these black captives are going to be potentially in a bit of danger of being recaptured, which is the kind of thing that could allow NohatCoder to get back into the game once he's used these walls to shut down the threats from ManaT. Capturing this stack and spreading it out over some white flats is going to be a pretty powerful move in terms of the flat count. So it's an interesting spot. Things are still looking okay for white, but I think less so than they were. Right, interesting. Decides to spread up this way. A little bit further away from the kind of connection that they had going on. That would have allowed more threats to develop. And now, if either of these stacks gets captured, that is going to sort of free up a lot of space for, and I'm not at all surprised to see NohatCoder put down yet another wall and say, okay, those stacks are mine. I'm going to grab hold of those and start really pushing to get back into the flat game. I mean, that was this spread was a, let's see, it's a +2 move for white and leaves ManaT up 1, 2, 6, 8, 9, 10 to 6. So yeah, leaves ManaT ahead on the flat count for now, but that may not last. The capstone capturing up, I think, is an interesting move. It's not threatening to crush this wall because, as before, black could then just spread down for the win. But it does mean that this stack couldn't immediately then spread across and get that big flat count gain. And now capturing over onto c5, it moves this stack away from the wall and potentially, unpins the capstone a little bit, although I still don't expect to see the wall crush happening because releasing this number of black pieces is, unless you have a very specific plan for how you're going to counteract whatever happens next, is not going to work out well for you. And NohatCoder sort of sees how this game is going and is happy to place his 5th wall of the game. ManaT hasn't played any. But as black, particularly with the 2 Komi, you can somewhat afford that. And I think NohatCoder is backing himself to say, okay, in the late game, wow. I was going to say that NohatCoder thinks in the late game that I can take this to flats, and I've got the skills and the position to win this. So rather than allow that capture onto c5, ManaT makes a negative flat count move, brings his capstone up and just says, okay, I've got all these liabilities, but I'm just going to hide them under my capstone for now and see how that goes. So, and this does give ManaT in the late game potentially a positive flat count move. Let me get 1, 2, 3, 4, 5. So yeah, those top 6 pieces can still move over onto b6, which would be a +2 move for ManaT. But that's going to be the kind of thing he's not going to want to do until the very end. So now the flat count is 8 to now 7. So NohatCoder is just up on the flats. But like I said, 8 to 9 on flat count, as Pluto says, when you factor in the Komi. That is going to be, if nothing were to happen here but each player placing more flats, ManaT's +2 move here onto c6 might be a winning proposition. So yeah, both players just placing more flats for the moment. I think. Okay, interesting. Placing on c3 there prevents ManaT from placing c3 himself. I would have been tempted from NohatCoder's point of view to place f3 instead, just because if, ManaT now placing f3, this is attack threat with the capstone jumping down. So NohatCoder's going to have to make a capture here. He's got the walls to do it. Hi Kimpo, welcome to the chat, at least the Playtac chat. Apologies if anyone's been chatting in Twitch that I haven't seen. I still need to figure out my optimal Twitch setup. But yeah, this is, it's an interesting position these players find themselves in now. Okay, goes for the downward capture onto c2, making his own attack threat through this cap. ManaT can shut that off relatively easily just by placing a white flat stone onto f2, which is kind of what I expect to happen. Yep. So where is NohatCoder looking to get his advantage now? This stack, 5 white flats, so that's 6 total pieces. So NohatCoder can take this whole stack and move it, for example, onto f2 if he wants to. Instead places f4, probably looking to capture down at some point and make attack threat that way. But yeah, I think NohatCoder, particularly as ManaT has slightly fewer reserves left and is therefore in control of, at the moment, when the game's going to end, NohatCoder is going to have to make some threats, force some disadvantageous captures from ManaT in order to sort of create those flat count differential swings that he's going to need to really guarantee the win. Because as I said, although NohatCoder is currently 1 up on the flat count when you factor in the Komi, this stack move onto b6 is going to reverse that. So ManaT making another attack threat, placing another flat, moving the game towards the end. NohatCoder decides rather than, well, he couldn't actually place on c3, again because the capstone is threatening to throw down and join up there, so instead uses the wall to come down here. And interesting, okay, ManaT now places the wall. That's kind of a preemptive move. Sets him back a little bit more on the flat count, but it means that he's looking to take this piece here, release the captive, and it's also a preemptive response to what I imagine ManaT was expecting, which was this f4 minus capture to create the attack threat, and this is a very strong response to that, both cutting off the threat and now saying, okay, I've got the +2 flat count move, which sort of mitigates the negative flat count consequences of placing the wall in the first place. And in fact, ManaT could even take this whole stack down onto c1 and then look to spread across onto a1 for what might be an even bigger flat count swing. So yeah, we said early on that it was looking nice for ManaT. to be honest. I think it is back to looking like White's game to lose at this point. Again, with all these walls down, although they've enabled NohatCoder to push the game towards its conclusion, towards the flat game, rather than being sort of forced into a tinue by White, those walls aren't preventing Black from really making any serious road threats of the kind which ManaT would need to respond to with negative flat count captures. So NohatCoder places a4. Not quite sure what the thinking is there, other than just trying to not make more negative flat moves. Potentially is going to be looking to make some kind of threat, either horizontally moving this wall out of the way at some point, or potentially was looking to go vertically and try and do something with smashing this wall here. And I think that wall smash is going to be something that NohatCoder may need to consider at some point. Obviously, there's a ton of white flats that he would be releasing by doing that, but these walls are sort of reducing how much damage those white flats can do. But now with ManaT having placed at c3, that wall smash is not an option. I mean, it wasn't quite an option previously anyway, because of this potential east-west road. And ManaT with just 2 flats left, I think. Let's take another quick look at the flat count. 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8, 9, 10 to Black. 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8, 9, 10, 11 to White. So as long as ManaT makes one of these positive flat count moves, so yeah, ManaT should be able to just place one more white flat and then play sort of 2 c2 minus and or okay, just needs to make sure he's keeping count of those flats. 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8, 9, 12, plays 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8, 9, 10, 11 plus 2 is 13 for NohatCoder, and will be 14. Let's put 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8, 9, 10, 11, 13, yep, to 14. I think it'll then be three c2 minus, or just 2 c2 minus. I'll have to place another flat, then 6 c5 plus, and that will put us in a position where let me think, 16 minus 2, 14. We may end up actually looking at a draw on the flats if that's the case, and it is notable that ManaT now can't place any more pieces without ending the game. But yeah, this is the point where counting those flats and having all the time left that these players have at this stage. We're 45 moves in and they've both got over 6 minutes left on the clock, so playing fast earlier has allowed them to really take their time on these moves and do the maths to figure out who is going to be able to take the win here. So yeah, we take that c2 minus move. Flat count is now 1, 2, 3, 4, 9, 12 to white. And 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 8, 9, 10, effectively 12 to black. Black is, I think the only option that NohatCoder has is to, he can't make attack threat from this position, so he's just going to have to place another flat stone. Or make a capture somewhere, but any capture he makes is only going to advance that flat count by 1. And as we're tied currently, 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8, 9, 10, 12 for black, 4, 7, 12 for white. This c5 plus should be the winning move. So that puts black effectively 1 ahead on the flat count. If ManaT now takes these 6 up to here, that's a swing of 2. It'll put him 1 up. NohatCoder will only be able to bring that back to level, and then placing this final flat should be the win for ManaT. I hope I've got that count right. Okay, or plays it c5, 6, c5 minus, that also works. And actually this is, yeah, there you go. And now, there you go, white wins by having more flats. 13 to effectively 12 with the Komi. Well played, ManaT. Really interesting game. Very tight endgame there. Just the one flat in it. And ManaT takes down NohatCoder in the first game. That's something of an upset, even with ManaT playing as white. So very well played to ManaT. Good game by both players, though. That was a really hard-fought, technical, and tight game. So we'll see how long we have to wait for game 2. But we should be back in a few minutes. Stay tuned. Okay, welcome back everyone to this USTA 2021 Open match again between NohatCoder and ManaT. It's game 2 now, with ManaT just having taken a very tight game 1 on flats by just 1. And starting off with the same sort of mirrored center opening, a slight variation with NohatCoder as white pushing onto d5 here, closer to his own flat rather than d2, but still a relatively traditional start, shall we say. ManaT putting his capstone down pretty early, looking to cut off this north-south threat, and then playing onto d2, looking to start and develop his own thing. NohatCoder now looking, okay, this capstone's going to come across and cut off my north-south threat, So looking to start building horizontally, makes the attack threat, the capstone does come across, and NohatCoder places a flat onto E5, which okay, and then capturing onto E4 rather, that was, and then captures onto E5, making another threat. Now it's going to be interesting. Okay, yeah, ManaT responds with the flat stone over, and no, I got it. Interestingly, both these games, white being a little bit conservative or taking their time over deploying the capstone. And now both players kind of close to but not quite making a threat. Obviously ManaT on this horizontal axis, NohatCoder vertically. Nohat could, for example, place E6 here, make a threat with the capture. Instead goes for the F3 threat instead. I like that better, because although it does make this vertical threat with the capture onto F5, it also develops this east-west horizontal threat along 2 and 3. So ManaT's going to have to respond. I think the most obvious response here is capturing F5 down to make a threat of his own. Other options would be, that is the other option, is E4 plus. Now, I was just gonna say I wouldn't be surprised to see the capstone come down on E4, threaten this stack, and to be honest, I now expect this stack potentially to come all the way across here onto C5, leaving no white flats here, but instead does decide to leave a black flat on E5. That brings white's capstone up, making another threat, and also threatening to grab this stack. So now this looks a little bit dicey for ManaT. He's got a couple of ways he can cut off this threat. Either F5 capturing down onto F4, or the capstone coming down here onto D3. In both of those cases, Nohat can immediately renew the threat with either E4 or E2. I was going to say I expect ManaT will probably go for the capstone capture, just because that doesn't introduce any more liabilities into his position. It's a slightly stronger response, but it's not a permanent one. Now we're going to have to come across this way. Nohat can continue to just push home this threat, placing on F2, and you're forcing ManaT to keep capturing with this capstone, keep introducing more of these flats under the capstone, reducing its power later in the game. Okay, now ManaT goes for the downward capture. Now it says, okay, well, I'll just make this horizontal threat now. Probably see the capstone come down here, I would guess. Although, again, you could capture down from C3 if ManaT's thinking, I really don't want to get my capstone too clogged up at this stage. So we'll see or could, for example, just place a wall on a2. That might actually be the best way to shut this down, just because, okay, it places a flat a2. That feels, to me, a little bit of a weak response, because NohatCoder can just place on a2 again, and then you're in the same position of either having to capture with the capstone or capture with the flat. And for black, you're already looking, with this stack sitting right there, for Nohat to take. Interesting that Nohat goes for b1 rather than a1 there. Not sure exactly what his line of thinking is there, because it does allow that a1 flat to cut that off. Now goes for the sort of diagonal threat. We don't really have a name for this particular kind of placing diagonally from your road threat in order to threaten the capture, rather than the placement for the win. In this case, obviously, Nohat is threatening either the placement on b3 or the capture on a2, and yet we see the capstone now come down, cutting that threat off. And now that has happened, Nohat doesn't have a way to immediately renew this threat. I wouldn't be surprised to see him now take the opportunity to capture this stack. Other options would be something just like, b3 or d3, to just keep the pressure on, keep placing flats, and looking to work on developing this threat. And again, this capture up here, NohatCoder can sort of make it any time. I think he is going to want to do it relatively soon, just so that he has the option to come across. Yeah, there you go. And that's now threatening to come across and cut off any threat that ManaT makes vertically, or come down and cut off the horizontal threat. And actually, it's not quite a tenuous pattern, but spreading down onto d3 is making a threat in two directions, both all the way up and down d, and also across this way. However, if he does decide to do that, ManaT would be able to come across onto d2 with the capstone and cut off both at once. But it's still not looking great for ManaT either way, so he has to think, okay, it's his turn. What is his best way of not getting tenuated here, and also eventually coming out of this in a position where he can start fighting towards either his own road or kind of pushing things towards flats at the end of the game. And again, with that 2 Comey, it is advantageous for black to try and push things into the late game. So, I mean, ManaT could be a little bit more aggressive and play something like a5, just try and kind of go all out for this road. Okay, instead goes for capturing onto a3. It's not attack threat, although it is obviously threatening to make one. So, NohatCoder puts down the wall, and you would think, okay, well, NohatCoder's kind of ahead. Why is he making a defensive move like this, placing a wall? But actually, this is quite an aggressive, almost offensive move. We talk about using walls as both defensive and offensive pieces. That's when they're most effective. And I think this is an excellent example of that. It is both cutting off this potential north-south threat, and it's saying, okay, I'm going to take this piece off you, and then I'm going to be looking with this stack that I now have control of to either make a big swing in the flat game by pushing down onto A1, or, for example, setting up some kind of a drawbridge threat by creating a road across this way. Okay, so ManaT does make that threat vertically, sorry. And yeah, I was wondering whether NohatCoder would go for the wall capture or throwing the capstone stack, but I think decides that this wall capture is definitely something he's going to want to make anyway, and sort of keeping the capstone throw in his back pocket, depending on which way he wants to go, because he's still got those options of either spreading across here onto B5 and A5, or spreading down to connect up to his pieces on D1 and D2. Now ManaT, okay, interesting. I was going to say I was expecting him to place on C1 in order to threaten this throw here, but instead goes for the throw first. And now NohatCoder does go for that spread of the capstone stack, cutting off this this vertical threat. So where does ManaT go from here? Flat count is now 1, 2, 3, 4, 6, 10 to white, and 7, 8, 9 with the Comey to black. And white has a +3 move that he can make when he wants to. So white well ahead on the flat count, and also closer to making attack threat by placing B4, B6 and A4, and then making this drawbridge, moving the wall off the top of his own flat, revealing that flat to make the road, or can just spread across and make a threat horizontally along A5, from A5 through to either F5 or F6. Okay, so ManaT, pretty sensible, places a wall onto B5. I think NohatCoder might well consider self-capture here onto B5 with the capstone. That is a negative flat count move, but it prevents ManaT from taking this stack and doing something like spreading across this way, and it also gives the capstone a bit more mobility and brings it back a bit more central. Instead goes for the wall on D4, looking to cut off this north-south threat that ManaT is trying to develop. And actually, I think what NohatCoder is looking for, perhaps, is to cut off this road and then make the smash here. Because if he's, at the moment he can't smash the wall on B5. Okay. But if he takes this spot on C4, he's going to be able to do that smash. It's going to unpin the capstone. Okay, now does that. Interestingly, I'm interested as to why he did this spread south onto A1 before doing this. I think maybe it is looking to try and set up this east-west threat so that the kind of somewhat pinning the black capstone so it can't come up and smash over here. All right, a lot happening here. ManaT moves over here, getting a little bit further away from that potential smash. NohatCoder can still take the smash if he wants to, as long as he only leaves one black flat stone on top of hit b5 here. If he left 2 or more, they would be able to spread south and connect up this road. Instead of going for the smash immediately, places e2 to sort of fully pin this capstone from going either north or south. So, yeah, an interesting spot. ManaT can obviously... Well, ManaT can now place something like a3, which would, again... Yeah, a3 does now prevent that that smash from happening again. So NohatCoder takes b4, says... And again, I assume that he's looking to make this smash at some point. He might not be. Moving the wall across here definitely makes this smash look more appealing, because that wall is then preventing any kind of spread down this way. ManaT, I guess, looking to unpin his capstone, capturing onto a2. And NohatCoder says, okay, well, we're kind of at a little bit of a stalemate on this side of the board, so I'm going to place f5, start saying, okay, I have 1, 2, 3, is that 8 pieces on this right-hand half of the board to your 1. Yeah, I think that's a good move from NohatCoder, looking to move the area of the action over to a place where he has more pieces. He's going to have a better chance of kind of gaining the upper hand. And I think if we look at the flat count again, 1, 2, 3, now 4, 5, 8, 10 effectively to black against 10 to white. So we're tied on flats, but white has 1, 2, 3 open liabilities here, whereas white has none. Okay, places e5. Now the wall smash will be attack threat. And actually, if ManaT doesn't do something about it, NohatCoder can leave a piece on a5, make the smash, and that is looking... That would be Tinue if ManaT doesn't see that possibility. Because the only response... If you're leaving the flat on a5 means that ManaT is not going to be able to place a wall to prevent the spread this way. So the only response available is going to be to capture f5 from f4, and then f6 can just come down here. And then, yeah, ManaT has no way of doing anything to stop this spread from left to right. So we'll see if ManaT notices that. If he does and plays something to, like, for example, a wall up here on e6 or on e4, NohatCoder can still continue to just make a threat. Okay, that does just about prevent Tinue, because it's going to allow ManaT to capture on e5 here. However, that smash is still potentially pretty devastating, and there might be, if anyone was on the Discord this morning, NohatCoder posted a very interesting, fun puzzle which involved a lot of self-captures. So, okay. Doesn't go for the smash. It would have been interesting to see whether there was a attenuate pattern in there anywhere. I think probably not quite, but it was close. Instead, captures down to e4. Obviously making attack threat for the capture on to f4. And ManaT is going to have to respond to that. Somehow responds by bringing the capstone over. NohatCoder can, F1, renews that fairly easily. So ManaT is forced to capture down. If NohatCoder places E3, for example, or could do E5, no, it goes for E3. That's still attack. Threatening to take this stack here. It is all looking pretty dire for ManaT, to be honest. NohatCoder has 5 flat stones left in his reserve. Is at 8, 9, 10, 11 on the flat count. ManaT has 7, 9. 8, 10. So white is up by 1 on the flat count. Oof. Okay. Captures onto E3. That is, again, not quite giving white a attenuate, although it is pretty damn close. Either with the capture down here onto E3 or just placing F3 and then capturing. Because obviously E3, capturing onto E3 threatens a spread up for the win. Can also spread left to right, but there aren't quite enough pieces in that stack to spread all the way to the edge for the win. And even if it was, the capstone could come across onto E2, but now this capstone stack with 6 white pieces under it, 7 total, any movement here is going to have to leave a white piece on D2 and in any space that it's looking to move through. So this is, it's not immobile, but it's definitely any movement that this capstone tries to make is going to be in something of desperation. Okay. So NohatCoder, I think, was probably taking some time there to see if he could find a attenuate pattern. Decides to play D5, E5, rather. Re-establish this connection. It is not an immediate attack threat, but it does set up again this potential smash attenuate. If ManaT doesn't do something about that, I think ManaT is going to really have to do something like placing a wall on either D4 or E4 to kind of cut off this potential attenuate pattern, try and get a hold of this stack here, make some positive flat count moves to see if he can squeeze this out somehow and try and get back into the game. But yeah, I think a wall on F4 is probably the best chance you have, because placing it on D4, NohatCoder can just place, for example, on okay, goes for the wall throw over there. Now this wall can still come across for the smash, or the capstone can come across for the smash, but that is not, then there aren't enough white pieces in that stack to threaten coming back this way. It would be tack for the spreading south. I'm not sure what the best response to that would be. Okay. Instead of going for the smash, just place it on F3, says tack again. Yeah, okay, now ManaT chucks another wall down. Flat count is 8-11 for white to 8-10 for black. And it has 3 white flats left. So, and worth noting that this white has 1+2 move by throwing these 2 pieces over onto B5. And even if black captures down, takes this stack, okay, goes for that one immediately. If it was me, I would have placed another flat or 2 before doing that. But this liability here is well protected by both the capstone and this wall here, so there's not much danger of losing that one. And now I think NohatCoder can pretty safely just play his last few flats for the win. Yeah, obviously taking this stack is decent for ManaT, but he doesn't have any way of spreading it out, covering up white flat stones to gain a real flat count advantage. So I think this is basically the game here. White makes attack threat, forcing ManaT to respond. Just goes for the capture. So now Nohat with 4, 8, 11 flats to just now 7 + 2 is 9 for ManaT. Just has to play his last 2 flats, probably on. Definitely doesn't want to play on E5, but D5 makes the attack threat. Or maybe see the wall. Yeah, one of these walls move, and this final flat stone can come down. And there we go. NohatCoder wins it 12-7, +2 for the Komi. And we have a tied match, 1 game apiece. That's 2 points each in the USTA Open standings. Let's see if we can bring up those, have a look at where each of these players are in the standings at the moment. So we had NohatCoder 5 matches, 16 points. That's 8 game wins. So 1 match win, if you win both games, that's worth 4 points. And ManaT on 13 points from the 4 matches that he'd played so far. So they will both go up by 2 on that score. And yeah, both definitely well within reach of the top of the table. It's going to be interesting to see. We have, I think, 2 or 3 rounds left, whether either of these players can push to really get up to that top 2 or 3 positions, as they have both dropped a few points now from their games, but yeah, as we saw, some very strong play there from both players, so I think they'll both be in amongst it come the end of the tournament. So I think we'll call it there. Thank you very much for watching, everyone. I hope you enjoyed the game, and well played to both ManaT and Nohat, and I hope to see you back again for some more of the 2021 Open in the coming days.